Episode 2 of Loki's dropped. There's 2 Lokis, and this show ain't big enough for the 2 of them. Well, actually, I hope it is, because there's like 4 episodes left. Hello everybody and welcome to my recap and review of episode 2 of Loki, which came out in the wee hours of the morning where I am and at different other places depending on where you are on this spinning ball that we call planet Earth. As always, this is a spoiler review, so from here on out I will be going into full spoilers on what happened on the last episode of Loki. If you don't want to know, then go watch Loki and then please come back and watch this show because I like doing it, but I don't want to ruin the experience for you. So this is your final warning. We will be going into a full spoiler mode review and recap of Loki episode 2 starting right now. Episode 2 is entitled The Variant, and at the very end of it, we get to meet who the Variant actually is. But before all of that, we open in 1985 at a Wisconsin Ren Fair, which in my mind really is the true nexus of the space-time continuum. I can't think of a better place to center all of reality. A team of TVA Minutemen arrive to try to apprehend the Loki variant that's been causing havoc and wiping out teams of TVA agents, but surprise, it is of course a trap. And there's a sequence that exploits, for the second time in a calendar week, my love for the Bonnie Tyler song Holding Out for a Hero. It's not just from Shrek, it's also from the 1980s. They used it in the Masters of the Universe Revelation trailer, now they've used it in Loki. I'm starting to think this is a specific way to get me to fall in love with everything that comes out in pop culture, because I'm gonna be honest, if it's got Holding Out for a Hero in it, I'm probably gonna love it. The Loki variant uses their Loki powers to turn all of the Minutemen against each other, takes their time resetting charges, and then kidnaps one of the team members, C20, and goes through the time door, disappearing from existence. And then we go into the Loki title card, which again has that great music sting from Natalie Holt for the second consecutive episode, and it looks like probably the rest of the series. The music in Loki is outstanding. My favorite music of any of the MCU shows by far. Some of my favorite music in the MCU. Kudos to you, Natalie Holt. We then catch up with Loki over at the TVA as he's going through his training and being very mean to Miss Minutes. I do not appreciate this Miss Minutes slander on the part of Loki. He's flipping through Mobius's sweet jet ski magazines. More on that later. And we get a little bit of exposition as we learn that the red branch that we've seen on the different devices around the TVA is when there is a Nexus event, when the timeline is splitting. If that branch redlines, that means that the timeline collapses, the sacred timeline is gone, reality as we know it comes to an end, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. Loki's training is interrupted as the team is dispatched to investigate the missing Minutemen from Ren Fair 85 in Wisconsin, and we learn that they are tracking a Loki, and we learn that the TVA has a lot of experience tracking down different Lokis. They say it's probably the most common variant for them to defeat. We see different versions of Loki. One of them looks kind of like a Hulk Loki. There's a Loki that's won some kind of an award. I like all of these different Lokis. Perhaps if there is a season 2 or some kind of a spinoff, we can see what was going on with them. But there is something different about this variant. It's smarter, it's quicker, and we don't quite know what's going on just yet. Loki also gets a cool new jacket with Variant on the back that's coming soon to a Comic-Con Hot Topic, and let's be honest, probably an American Eagle near you. I also like the moment where Loki has to educate Mobius on the difference between illusion projection and duplication casting. This is a great rookie proves his own merit moment. It shows that Loki's not just going to be a pawn of the TVA, he does have something to offer. Once they arrive at the scene, Loki does his typical thing and tries to trick Mobius into thinking that they're walking into a trap and also trying to get himself into a meeting with the Timekeepers, but Mobius knows what's going on. He catches on to Loki's tricks and they wipe clean the timeline, having come no closer to catching the Loki variant that they were there looking for. We then have a scene where Ravonna Renslayer, who is Gugu Mbatha Raw's character, does a debrief with Mobius, and they linger on one particular object. There are many different trophies in Ravonna's office, but there is a pen from Franklin D. Roosevelt High School that obviously has some kind of significance. Mobius says he doesn't remember this from another case, and this office in general, to me, has a vibe of just not trusting the TVA at all. The 3 big statues, the fact that the Timekeepers are everywhere, they seem to be very benevolent. Something very, very wrong is going on here, and also some very curious things. And this Franklin D. Roosevelt pen has me thinking, is Ravonna in on it? Is it something that's tied to her past? Is it something that's tied to the Timekeepers' past? I know it's just a pen, but sometimes a pen isn't just a pen, especially in a show like this. I got real buddy cop vibes from the first episode of this show, but this is pretty much a TV procedural, a pretty good good TV procedural, by the way, and a replication of the classic buddy cop vibe. You have Owen Wilson in the Danny Glover, Nick Nolte role. You have Loki, who's just bored and anxious and doesn't know what he wants to do, but also smart and the person that does ultimately come up with the solution. It's a dynamic we've seen so many times, but integrating it into the MCU with a beloved character like we have with Loki has been done really well in this show, and I actually really enjoyed this episode. The first 2 episodes I think have been great. My favorite first 2 episodes of any of the 3 shows that we've seen so far from the MCU on Disney+, and it's largely because of the dynamic between Tom Hiddleston and Owen Wilson. They just interact so well together, they have a natural chemistry, and it's really kept the show going. As Loki investigates to try to glean any kind of clue about this variant, he's given his own case file, and we're reminded that there are things that happen to quote-unquote him in his own future that he doesn't know about yet. As he opens the page to the destruction of Asgard, he has to read about Ragnarok on a piece of paper. This is a very underplayed moment from Tom Hiddleston, but we see this grief, we see this sorrow go over Loki's face. In all honesty, there's more time taken to mourn Ragnarok in this episode of Loki than, in my opinion, there was in the entire movie Thor Ragnarok. But it's not all for nothing, because he also notices that in that report there was 0 variance energy detected, and this gets him thinking. Loki has a theory that the reason that they can't find the variant is that it is hanging out near some kind of an apocalypse, so that any changes that it makes to the timeline won't be picked up by the TVA, because all of those changes will be wiped out by whatever disaster it is that's about to completely annihilate wherever the variant is. It can just then go back in time, relive the same moments leading up to the apocalypse, but again have none of its changes register and be untraceable across the timeline. And this is something that definitely intrigues Mobius, and maybe would have intrigued him more if Loki didn't completely ruin Mobius's lunch by explaining what he was doing. And again, this is a great piece of exposition married with situational comedy, married with physical comedy. It just worked really well, this scene. It could have been very flat, very dry, kind of like Thor the Dark World, honestly, where you just had your characters around a table dryly explaining science. Here you have Loki, you have Owen Wilson doing the character beat, saying, "Oh yeah, what are you doing to my lunch here? It's my lunch, my salad." Tom Hiddleston's having a good time putting the pepper and the salt and pouring things in the salad. It all works really well, and it just goes to show you the commitment to a show when you're not just trying to get information across, you're trying to entertain people, you're trying to do it in an entertaining way. This was what could have been a very dry exposition scene that was made entertaining by going that extra mile and finding a way to make it fun. I also love this side trip where Loki tests his theory at Pompeii, jumps around, makes an ass of himself, basically. We see the volcano explode, but lo and behold, even though this strange man was jumping up and down and throwing things, making changes to the timeline that should have registered on the equipment from the TVA, there are no changes detected, which means that because Pompeii was going to be completely annihilated by this volcano, nothing Loki did mattered. It proved his theory, and now the TVA has something to go on. They can try to look at apocalyptic events throughout all of time and history and see if that might be the one where the Loki variant is hiding. But still, there are a lot of different apocalypses, so while they have a narrower scope, they're still not a whole lot closer to catching the variant that they're looking for. Then we have another great scene between Owen Wilson and Tom Hiddleston. I don't know if there was a concerted effort to give them a lot of great scenes together, but that's really what episode 2 was for me. A series of great Owen Wilson, Tom Hiddleston scenes strung together. Here we have them talking, first of all, about Mobius's love of jet skis. And this is what he had to say, quote, "There was a beautiful union of form and function called the jet ski back in the early 1990s. It's something that he's always wanted to ride, but as an agent of the TVA, he knows that if he were to take such an action, it would cause a branch in the timeline, and so he knows that he'll never be able to do it." This morphs into a conversation about the nature of the TVA itself, and Loki says, well, this is ridiculous. You're saying that these timekeepers created this whole universe where you're living, and that they're going to eventually get to the end of time? This is insane. And I love how Mobius turns that around and says, like, really? Okay, well, you're telling me that you're a frost giant who was raised by a god in Asgard? Like, your reality is just as ridiculous to me as mine is to you. And then he says something very interesting, and I liked this quote. Mobius says, "Existence is chaos. Nothing makes any sense, so we try to make some sense of it," which is pretty much what the TVA is there to do, to make sense out of complete chaos. Loki then makes the point that it seems like the only people in the world who have free will, since there's one sacred timeline, are the people at the TVA. And then Mobius says, like, well, that may be the truth right now, but once the Timekeepers are able to unravel the end of time, then everything will be finished. Everybody can go home peacefully and their work will be done. And I'm telling you, there's like a Wizard of Oz type thing going on here. These Timekeepers are too revered, too almighty. Of course, you can't get a peek behind the curtain because that's really what Loki wants to do. Loki wants to pull the curtain back and see the Wizard of Oz, and everyone's saying like, oh, maybe later, maybe. Okay, well, I haven't met them, but that person has, and that person swears to me they're real. This is the biggest mystery for me that I'm looking forward to seeing what the show does to unravel it, is what is the true nature of these Timekeepers? Because I don't believe for a second that we're going to get to the end of the show and the Timekeepers are actually three benevolent beings who are working to pick apart the multiverse and create a perfect sacred timeline. There's some motivation here. I don't know from who or from what or from where, but I think it's going to have MCU changing impacts, probably because we're going to be going into a multiverse with Doctor Strange going forward. I'm really hoping that the answer to this question is an interesting answer, because if we get to the end of the show and this mystery kind of goes out with a whimper, then I feel like it's going to drag down the buildup, which has been what's so great in episode 1 and 2 thus far. Then the light bulb goes off in Mobius's head and he realizes that he does have one other clue. It's the candy that we saw him get from the little French girl at the cathedral back in episode 1. So now there are two things that they can investigate. They know that they have to get some kind of an apocalyptic event and at some point where this particular candy was being sold. And that means that they are able to zero in on one event that matches both of these criteria, and that is a 2050 hurricane in Haven Hills, Alabama that completely wiped the town off the map. This is the only place where the Loki variant could be hiding. So Mobius gets clearance from Ravonna to take Loki and a strike team to this natural disaster to try to apprehend the Loki variant again. I hope that this episode isn't the last time that they're going to do this disaster as a backdrop for trying to apprehend the Loki variant, because obviously at the end of this episode, the Loki variant is still very much on the run and would have to stay off of the radar, even though the TVA's got a lot more going on at the end of this episode. Maybe it is to help the Loki variant hide her tracks, but I love just the setting, the fact that we come up, you see the storm surge. It's very haunting, but also epic. This does not look like a TV show in any way, shape, or form. I loved how this was staged. You have the rain, you have Loki coming in and using magic to dry his clothes. Again, you're able to not only have a cool situation, but have a nice joke around that situation. I love this whole disaster thing, and I hope that they keep this going throughout episodes 3, 4, 5, and 6. Of course, the TVA's arrival is noticed by the Loki variant, and it turns out that the Loki variant can jump from body to body. So even though Loki is speaking to somebody, it's never the actual variant until the very, very end of the episode. And as the variant is jumping from body to body, I love the performance from Wunmi Musaku. She's actually been great in the entire show as Hunter B-15, but replicating these kind of Loki-isms, and especially at this time when you think that this could be Tom Hiddleston's Loki jumping from body to body, but the way that she says, well, if anyone's anyone, then you're me, and having that Loki smile that she flashes, and then Tom Hiddleston flashing the Loki smile back. All of the actors who were embodying Loki in this episode did a good job, especially because they were serving different functions, but this was my favorite moment, showing that this was an attitude, a spirit of Loki that was going from person to person. It reminded me a lot of the Denzel Washington, John Goodman movie Fallen back from the late 90s. Loki tries to draw the variant out by saying he wants to overthrow the Timekeepers and wants to recruit the variant as his lieutenant. Is that true? Is that not true? Is that Loki just being a trickster? I'm sure we're going to find out in a new episode. We also hear from C20, the captured TVA Minuteman, that she gave up how to find the Timekeepers. Is that going to be coming up in the future? We'll see how that pays off. And then we get the big reveal, which is that the Loki variant is not a version of Tom Hiddleston. It is a female Loki variant, if she is a Loki variant at all, played by Sophia DiMartino. This is an actress that many people knew was in the show. Most people had speculated that she was going to be playing a female version of Loki. We don't know what her name's going to be yet. We have kind of a Baby Yoda situation. The show credited her as the variant, so that's what I'm going to stick with for right now. I will just call her the variant, but she does appear to be some form of female version of Loki, and she delivers a very specific message that's probably the most hurtful thing that Loki could hear about, because he keeps asking, why do you want me? Why me? What's this? Blah, blah, blah. And she says, this isn't about you. And that adds an extra level of intrigue because the assumption has always been that this is a version of Loki that's out there causing mischief for something related to his backstory when we thought it was Tom Hiddleston, but it turns out there may be something even more going on. And the variant seems to have a very ambitious plan up her sleeve. She drops all of the charges she's been stealing into different time portals, and then we see at the TVA that there are branches coming out of the secret timeline from everywhere. We are in crisis mode. There are all kinds of variations all heading toward the red line. The sacred timeline is a mess, and it's going to take a very long time to get a hold of it, if they even can. We could be looking at a full-blown multiverse event here. By the way, it was really interesting to look at as all of the different branches came in, where exactly all of these branching timelines are being created, because it wasn't just on Earth, it was across all of the different realms, many of the ones that we've seen before. I saw Vormir on that list. I saw Asgard on that list. You can also see that Titan is on there. Ego the Living Planet, Kurt Russell is on this list. So it's not just places that we've seen on the show and planets and realms that we've seen on the show. It seems to be everywhere in the multiverse that the TVA now has to go in and try to mop up this mess that has been made. The show ends naturally on a cliffhanger because most of these episodes are going to. The variant waves goodbye to Loki and goes through a door. Loki looks at it, considers staying with the TVA, then steps through the door, and the door closes, meaning we have now split up our super duo of Loki and Mobius. I hope they get these two back together really soon because I love Hiddleston and Owen Wilson together. And next week, the variant and Loki are on the run from the TVA. The timelines are branching everywhere. We could be going across realms. Who knows what we're going to see? We could literally see anything in episode 3 of this show, and I for one cannot wait to see where this story is going. So that wraps up episode 2. A lot of interesting places to go, a lot of clues. What's going on with Ravonna? What's going on with the variant? What's going on with the Timekeepers? A lot of questions, not many answers. I'm hoping those answers are great. That is going to be the key, I think, to this show, is so many great questions. Are the answers up to the level of the questions? A lot of shows have been sunk by answers that could not match the questions that were being asked. I will always hold out for a hero, if you will, that this show is going to be able to stick the landing. What did you think of episode 2 of Loki? Are you excited by where the show's going? Do you think that you know where the track of this show is going to end up? Let me know down in the comments below. And as always, if you want to check me out on Patreon, you can check me out at patreon.com/Dan Murrell. We just did our watch along for this month, which randomly was Thor Ragnarok. So if you sign up now, if you missed that, you won't be able to watch it live, but there is an archive of it. You can queue it up and watch Thor Ragnarok along with us. It was a lot of fun. Also, don't forget that my podcast drops later today. We're going to be doing an episode on Mission Impossible, and not too long from now, I will also have my review for the new Pixar film Luca. The embargo drops later this morning. That's why this episode is out a little bit earlier than usual, so be sure to look out. So 3 videos just today here on the channel. Tomorrow, I'm trying to get out a review of The Hitman's Bodyguard's Wife, which is opening in theaters this week. And then on Friday, we'll be doing our live show covering all of the news of the week and also taking your questions. So a lot of stuff still to come on the channel this week. Thank you so much for joining me for this spoiler review of Loki episode 2 called The Variant. I will be back next week. It might be a little bit late because I'm going to be traveling back from a screening of a big and fast movie that's coming out next weekend. So this video might be a little bit later because it's going to be a long trip back from where I have to go in order to see the screening. But don't worry, I will have a spoiler review of Loki out right around the regular time next week, probably because I'm not going to be able to come home and not be able to watch the show as soon as it comes out. I'm going to be watching episode 3 of Loki as soon as I can, and I hope you'll be here next week to break it down with me. Thank you so much. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you next time.